Welcome to the Prepped and Polished podcast, the podcast that empowers you to take control of your education, featuring weekly interviews with influencers in the world of education, as well as tutoring tips, lessons, and updates. And now, here's your host, Alexis Avila.
Welcome back to the Prepped and Polished podcast. It's your host, Alexis Avila. And make sure to join our Prepped and Polished podcast community on Facebook and SoundCloud. Just visit preppedandpolished.com/podcast. Have a question or reaction during or after the show, you can email me at radio@preppedandpolished.com, or if you go to preppedandpolished.com, there's a chat box that pops up and you can just type in it and I get it right away. Today on episode 196, I'm speaking to Dr. Joanie Connell, a psychologist and author of Flying Without a Helicopter, How to Prepare Young People for Work and Life. Joanie Connell is founder and CEO of Flexible Work Solutions, Inc., a company that works with other companies to attract, develop, and retain top talent. Her clients are Fortune 100 companies, not-for-profit and government agencies, and high-tech, biotech, healthcare, finance, legal, and other industries. As a professor, she's taught business and psychology students at all academic levels. Go to her website flyingwithout.com. For another related podcast, make sure to go back to episode 140, where I talked to Dr. Delvina Miremadi on how kids can realize their resilience. On today's episode, Joanie gives us her tips on how kids can become more self-sufficient and resilient, and gives parents strategies on how to step back and let their kids grow, and how to, better let go of their kids and as they get ready for young adulthood. So let's get right down to this episode. This is episode number 196 with Dr. Joanie Connell. Enjoy it. Joanie Connell, thanks for coming on the Prepped and Polished podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Alexis. Thanks for having me.
Great. So can you start by telling us a little bit about your background and how your background led you to where you are today, an author and owner of your own consulting business, and an author of Flying Without a Helicopter?
Sure, absolutely. My background is in psychology, in organizational psychology. I'm a consultant, and I work with people and companies to be better leaders, and I help companies develop their skills of their employees. And, in this work, I found that a lot of the complaints were about the younger people coming in. And this was, maybe about 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, and it's kind of like this whole millennial generation thing. It really started to shift, and we're finding a shift in, not to do any bashing or anything. It was just like there's some parenting shifts that have been happening at the same time. And I happen to notice that too, because I am a parent. My daughter is now 16, but, a while back, I was noticing how parents were doing things a lot differently than they had been before. And we've got that helicopter parent phenomenon, right, going on, where people are just a lot more protective than they used to be. And there's a lot more competition out there, too. So there are a lot of reasons. We can go into that later. But I noticed that the parents were doing so much more for the kids. And then the kids, when they grew up and got to the workplace, they didn't have as many of those real life skills when they got there, and that's what the managers were complaining about. They were saying that the young workers weren't resilient, they couldn't handle feedback, they didn't have communication skills. That was a really big one. It's still a number one problem with younger people coming into the workplace. And they weren't independent. They needed so many instructions. They took so much time from the managers that the managers couldn't get their work done. So I wrote the book Flying Without a Helicopter, not because it was my life goal or anything. It was just because it was in response to the consulting work I was getting and my experiences, and then, of course, a lot of research into the parenting phenomenon to help figure out how those two meshed.
Awesome. What is helicopter parenting, and how has this been an issue when raising kids today?
Yeah, well, helicopter parenting refers to parents who the visual is hovering over their children, right? We've also got this lawnmower parent phenomenon, which is the parents who push the lawnmower ahead and plow the path, clear the path so that the kids don't have any obstacles in the way. And I'm telling you, it's all done with good intentions, right? The parents want the best for their children. They want to protect them against any harm. They want to clear the path so they have the best opportunities. And we're all doing it. We all, to one extent or another. But the problem arises is when the kids don't develop some of these skills of their own. So what happens at school when the parents go in and talk to the teachers and don't let the kids talk to the teachers and work out their issues? They don't learn how to deal with conflicts and how to advocate for what they want. When parents go in and make sure that everybody gets invited to the birthday party, if they didn't get an invitation from their friend and their feelings are hurt, they're protecting their kid from feeling bad, but they're not letting their kid learn that, it does hurt sometimes, and how to work through that and how to feel the pain and still be able to move on and get through your day and be with other friends, things like that. So it's the phenomenon is positive in some ways. Obviously, we have to help our kids to some extent more than we did. There's so much more going on. After 9/11, that was when the big shift occurred. People started getting a little more scared.
Oh, wow.
Right? There's the competition to get into schools. People feel like they have to be a lot more engaged in their children's schooling and all that. But there is this fine line when we're doing so much that it's at the expense of their ability to succeed in life as a result, because they end up moving home when they're 30 and still living with their parents and depending on them.
Yeah, I see that trend a lot. I was just curious as you were talking. I was wondering, like, what kind of student were you growing up? Were you the one where your parents told you to go, fend for yourself when it came to like going to teachers and stuff like that?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I'm a Gen Xer, so, Gen X has that reputation of being sort of the latchkey kids, the neglected kids, all that. So definitely, maybe the opposite, polar extreme, right?
Sure.
Okay, I was spending for myself more than I do for my own child. But, definitely build resilience there in doing that, yeah.
That's interesting because, like, maybe the Gen X parent feels the need to helicopter because they're just so resilient themselves that they feel like they can do their work and their kids' work at the same time. I don't know.
Yeah,
That'd be
no, I
far-fetched.
think there's some of that. I also think, we look at how people are raised and the issues that they had growing up, and baby boomers too. They raised the early millennials, and they often react against their parents being so disciplining, and harming them psychologically. They felt like, oh, my parents were so mean, and they whip out the belt to whip us into shape, that kind of thing. And I would never do that to my child, and then go the other extreme rather than just saying, let's take a moderate approach, which is generally what I recommend.
Yeah, that's always the best. So we talked a little bit about why parents feel the need to helicopter their parents. Can you talk a little bit more about maybe the fear that they feel perpetuated in use? You mentioned that in your book, and also the competition today. Are those some of the factors that lead to helicopter?
Yeah, I tell you, when I talk to parents, I often hear this, but if I don't do it, my kids will be left behind. I'm afraid that my kids will get left behind, and they need to get into this school or do this thing, to compete with the rest of the people. And so there is a fear there. And then there's also the fears of the security, especially when kids are younger. Well, I don't want to let them go out on their own and do things because somebody might, grab them or something horrible would happen. And that's just unimaginable for a parent. But those are the kind of fears that I think that come up for people. And, how do I react to that when people talk to me? And the advice is, well, helping the kids learn how to do it in a way that's safe. Of course, it's reasonable. You don't let your 2-year-old out on their own, go to the playground because they can't handle that. But maybe, a 10-year-old can be walking to school alone because they know how to, if they're mature enough to get there, and they might have other people to rely on if you're not home, that kind of thing. So thinking about what a kid can do and pushing them a little bit to develop some of the independence and the decision making, I think is really important, because you can't always be there for your kids, and they have to be able to do things on their own eventually. So if they're learning along the way what are the decision making skills they need to have good judgment, then you won't have to worry as much because they'll do the right thing.
That's awesome. Are there any good books out there that kids and parents can read, either together or on their own, aside from your book, of course?
I know. Oh, that's a good question. I'd have to think about the names, but there are definitely books around emotional intelligence that are good. I'm trying to think if that would be for kids as well. Some of the Daniel Goleman has some good books out there, and maybe the How to Win Friends and Influence People kind of gets into some of that as well. There are some younger versions of that for teens. But learning on how to communicate and how to deal with some of the resilience, I think, is really key. I'd have to give you some more thoughts on that if you want to put them in the show.
No problem.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Great. So I was wondering if you gotten any blowback from your book from helicopter parents, any that have taken offense by your book. You do take a stance, so maybe some felt a little bit defensive of their own parenting techniques. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, a really good question. I have to tell you, that was my fear in publishing this book. But I have actually been really surprised that I haven't gotten that. And I don't know if it's just people don't want to talk to me if they find it offensive, but the book is meant to be non-judgmental. It's meant to be, look, you can, any action that you take has consequences, right? And there are pluses and minuses to every decision, right? And at one point, if you want to keep your kid more protected because you have a good reason, and then there are pros because they're not going to be in harm's way. But a con might be later that they're not developing the resilience. So you have to make that decision at every point and for every child, because there's not a one-size-fits-all for every kid. So I try to say, just be aware of when you're making these decisions, what are some of the repercussions that could happen later on. It's not like you must do it this way or that way, but it's just more of an awareness factor.
Awesome. Are you planning to write any more books in the future, like a second version of it, or just update it, or I don't know?
That's a good question,
pretty fresh
too.
To me, but.
Yeah, you've got all the great questions. Well, let's see. What do I do right now? I actually have another podcast that I do, which is called Real Life Lessons. It's on Women Lead Radio, and that's talking about women who have had these real life lessons and how they succeed at work because of that. And I blog occasionally, but is there a second book? I've been contemplating one that's dealing with different generations in the workplace, because that's been a lot of conflict there in terms of even the younger people getting out there and saying, I'm not valuing the older generations, and the older generations not valuing the millennials. We hear a lot of the bashing and all that. So how to value people in these different generations, that's kind of the direction I've been going. But if there's more of a need, I'll respond to it. That's where it all came from to begin with.
Yeah. So what about tips for parents? How can we, any tips on how they can kind of learn to chill out, take a step back, let their kids kind of make those mistakes so that they feel okay with it? Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of anxiety in doing that. And, it's anxiety in letting your kids do things for the first time and hoping they'll be okay. I can tell you, my daughter just flew home from camp across the country last Friday, and it was terrifying for me, but I had to let her do it. Inside, I was like, oh, you'll be fine, but I'm going, gosh, if she misses her connection, what's going to happen? So I can tell you there is that. It's about managing your own fears and being able to let go and let them try it anyway, and have some kind of fail-safe in place, right? But so a lot of that is managing your own fears, but also the control, wanting to have control and realizing that you don't necessarily have control over everyone. I mean, you try to have a situation where you can predict the outcome, but I mean, kids will, they'll just show up in a completely different outfit when they're a kid, when it's picture day, and you're just like, whoa, what just happened here?
Wow.
So learning to let go. So you're asking for the strategies. I would say one of them is just, talking about feeling the fear and anxiety and working through that on your own. A second one is, I said, helping the kids learn how to make decisions. So instead of telling them what to do in a situation, ask them the questions that they need to ask themselves to figure out how to make that decision. So, when somebody says, nice. I'm just trying to think of a really good example here. When the kid decides they're going to watch a movie instead of do their homework, you can ask them, okay, well, so what might happen if you go to school and you don't get your homework done, and then they can talk through, well, I might get a lower grade, or the teacher, this or that. Well, okay, so then you can talk through a little bit more about that, and help them make the decision of, well, maybe today the movie is okay because I don't really have that much to do and I can get up early and do it in the morning. But maybe, if I don't get it done in time and I oversleep, then I'm going to get the bad grade. And so they're sitting there trying to take responsibility for their decision. And sometimes you're like, fine, okay, watch the movie and then see what happens, and if it's not like their final exam, and they're going to bomb the course, you can let them get a low grade that day in their homework. Maybe that's not a big problem. So, letting them make the decisions and understand what are the possible outcomes is another area. So those are two that I talk about a lot in the book.
And do you feel like letting the kid make the decision that strategy applies to cell phone usage? So would you let a kid, if the kid really wants a cell phone, their kid has one, would you kind of apply that approach as well? Or do you kind of recommend more of a hard line, you shouldn't have one until you're 15 or 17 or something like that?
Well, I tend to judge it more on the individual.
Sure.
Because some kids, and the situation. I mean, if you've got two different households, a kid has to move between and different parents are picking them up, you might need to give a kid a cell phone earlier than you would if they didn't have a good reason for it. If you have a kid who's prone to just sitting in front of it playing games all the time, you might want to be more restrictive. But if you've got a kid that you can educate on, what are the downsides of being addicted to your phone and how to figure out how to manage that, then you can give them a lot more freedom. So I don't have a hard line. I really think it's about working with the individuals and helping them, figuring out where they're at and how they can move forward in a healthy way.
Nice. So as I was reading your book, Flying Without a Helicopter, it was always good, but it went from good to great when you started talking about bullying, because I just felt like it's really easy and I've talked to a lot of people who talked about bullying on the podcast. It's really easy to just say, which is the right thing to do still, but to go to somebody for help, to seek out a teacher or, a guidance counselor, which is absolutely appropriate. But you really get right into, what is it about me? What can I do? And it was so empowering to hear that. So I was wondering, so it's a problem today, bullying, but in your book you mentioned it's always been there. It's not just like it happened the last 10 years. So what's your take on bullying and what could kids do to deal with it?
Right. In addition to what you said, obviously, if there's a big problem, getting some help from some adults around. But the empowerment, I love the way that you said empowerment, because if a kid is constantly going to adults to solve their problems for them, they're going to be disempowered, right? And not learn how to deal with things on their own. So figuring out what inside you can do to take responsibility for not letting someone bully you. And that might be talking to the bully, it might be ignoring them, it might be getting your friends involved to get a group of people to stand up to the bullies. It might be seeing somebody else being bullied and not being a bystander and doing nothing, but it might be actually taking a stand and tell the bully not to do it anymore, or getting help for the kid. So it's a matter of figuring out what you can do in a situation to stop it and to stand up for yourself. It's not just the bully in that case, it's yourself as well. And the other thing is figuring out how much. If someone's beating you up and there's physical harm, that's going to be a real problem. But if someone's just calling you a name, there might be a way for you to empower yourself to say, I'm not going to let that get to me. I'm just going to let it roll off. I'm Teflon. It can just slide off of me and not affect me. So it's about figuring out how you can react to it and taking that your own responsibility for your reaction to the bullying, not for the bully's behavior, but for your reaction to it.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, that's and again, that's doing work, and that's what this book is all about: is taking responsibility, just putting a little bit more effort. And in this case, it's like effort in yourself. So I really like that. It just goes with all the themes in your book. What do you love most about your work?
Well, my work in general is all about helping people realize their own goals and improve themselves in their lives. And so when I work with executives and managers and companies, it's about helping them be better leaders and develop themselves. When I work with parents and younger children, it's about helping them be empowered and achieve their goals. So for me, when I see somebody improving themselves in a way that they want to, I know that I've achieved something just to be supportive of them and give them some things to think about, even if they've done all the work to get there. So that's what I find so rewarding.
Great. And any advice to teens listening to us today who are getting ready to cross that bridge from teenage years to young adulthood?
Yep. Okay, the parents aren't going to like this one, but it might be to wean your parents a little bit too, because I tell my daughter, you'll always be my baby, and she's like, oh my gosh, I'm not a baby anymore, so trying to tell the parents, you have to let go a little bit and let me try something. And so it can be a very loving, friendly conversation, but like, hey, Mom, Dad, I'd like to try this one on my own and come to you if I need help, rather than, trying to get the parents to let go and give them a little bit of freedom, independence as well.
It's so funny because I have a 2-year-old who says, don't call me baby, I'm a big girl. So I guess that never goes away.
No, right. I just say, I know you're not a baby, but you'll always be my baby. Right?
So you have to be very clear. Okay. Noted. Oh, that's great. So Dr. Connell, thanks for coming on the Prepped and Polished podcast. Really love the book, and I hope everyone can really read it. It's amazing. Flying Without a Helicopter. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And this wraps up our show today. This was episode 196 with Joanie Connell. To work with Joanie, go to her site, flexibleworksolutions.com. Episode 197 is coming soon, and we're approaching 200 episodes. Episode 197 will be our next tutoring tips episode, which will be the third part of a 3-part series on how to avoid 3 pitfalls of rhetorical skill questions on the ACT English test. Remember to access all of our podcasts. Go to preppedandpolished.com/podcast, or you can go to soundcloud.com/prepped and polished. Thanks for joining us on the Prepped and Polished podcast. Now go out there and take control of your education.
You've been listening to the Prepped and Polished podcast. For more information, check out preppedandpolished.com. Also, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening. Class dismissed.